Welcome back to part 2 of my Elden Ring preview. This one is on glitches and exploits, and I'm going to make it a little shorter. I have to admit, I might not have done enough sleeping when I was recording all this footage in the first place, and as soon as it came time to edit it, I managed to get myself sick, so I have lots of time, but it's been a struggle to talk and get these videos together. So let's just get right into it, and I'll try to keep it fairly short and sweet without too much of my usual rambling. The reason I can keep this one pretty short is because basically most of the glitches you're familiar with from past games, exploits, they're all pretty much here and have only been changed a little bit, or are even in some cases easier to do with the addition of an at-will jump button and your mount and its ability to double jump. So let me just cover some of that and let's get to it. I'm going to start with some common ones, and I'm going to try to explain terms as I go as quickly as possible. So let's talk about cheesing enemies. If you're not familiar with that term, cheesing enemies usually just means you kill them from a spot where they can't hit you back. Now, I've used some of this clip before, I realize, but what is going on here is I'm up on an area where the tree sentinel can't reach me, and I'm using spells and arrows to wear him down to make it really easy before I ended up just getting bored and jumping down and killing him in the end. But if you had enough arrows and enough FP, you could actually just sit up here and cheese him the whole way. This is more possible to do in this game because of the open world design and how quickly you're able to escape from enemies with Torrent, but also you are still able to kite enemies like in previous games. Now, kiting, if you imagine like pulling on a kite string, pulling an enemy against the wind, they are designed to return back to their starting position after a while to make it harder for you to pull them away into an area where you have the advantage. But by doing things like getting closer to them, hitting them in the back, various things that interrupt that pattern, they will keep coming after you. Now, there's a specific big angry enemy out of bounds that I'm not showing, but it's a really good example of an enemy that's really tough, but you can kite it really far to a spot where you can cheese it. Another variation on this is getting enemies to fall down elevator shafts, which usually will kill them or cause them to get stuck at the bottom so that you can shoot them with long-range attacks. But I had an odd one when I tested it on Vare right near the beginning of the network test, and weirdly he didn't die, but he wasn't down at the bottom of the elevator shaft. And I ended up going down, looking around for him, trying to figure out what happened to him, and he just never reappeared until I sat down at the bonfire again. So it doesn't seem to be foolproof. They may have tried to implement sort of a fix where it just kind of like puts them aside, where they're just sort of sitting there in memory, not dead, not, falling through the ground or anything, but not actually there, and just respawns them when you next sit at the site of grace. But I just found that really weird that usually they either fall down the elevator shaft and they die, or they get stuck at the bottom and just kind of stand right next to the elevator and you can shoot at them, or just leave them down there and ignore them until you feel like killing them. So I'm not quite sure on that one yet. It may take more testing. It only happened with, I now call him Vengeful Vare because he came back from the nether to get me. But yeah, just an odd wrinkle on that one, though it does still generally work from my testing. The addition of an at-will jump button and Torrent's ability to double jump only, exacerbates these issues to the mind of From Software, but makes them easier to pull off for people wanting to speedrun, glitch around, exploit, whatever you're doing. And one of those is the same thing that you saw me do in the first video, where I showed people how to break out of bounds normally. That, people call it all kinds of different things. I call it float glitching, I've heard people call it deathlock, all kinds of stuff. But where you get stuck in a falling animation that will kill you after about 10 seconds. But if you come in contact with another piece of geometry with collision coming through at another angle, it will often force you through the wall. Now, you can see here I've managed to get myself inside a hillside with Torrent, and that's, again, easier to do with his ability to double jump, and he just kind of slides around a bit in a weird way and moves at high speed, and it makes it easier to accomplish some of these things. So that is something to be aware of, is that the ability to just jump anytime you want and for Torrent to double jump definitely adds to these. One I want to go into specifically though is what I call the hitch jump. Now, this involves actually taking advantage of the game running poorly to land a jump that you shouldn't be able to make. So what happens is when the delay in frames gets so big that it starts dropping them, this also affects animation frames. Now, what this will cause is that sometimes it will make you just sort of end up barely landing a jump, and you see the way you hitch as you land that you are not intended to be able to make. This is something that really is only going to work on the older consoles or really crappy PCs, but it is a very useful exploit that has been in numerous past games and is only easier now that you can jump at will and double jump. I could probably go on for quite a while about how Torrent gives you a much increased ability to traverse in this game versus on foot, but let's just say Torrent is the boundary breaker and the Billy Goat Toad wall crawler and many other things that you will discover to, hopefully let you explore a little bit, but also sometimes let you get around things that should be obstacles or difficult to defeat. Let me just tease you a little bit of spoiler-free out-of-bounds footage here, just showing me hopping around with him, but it's definitely going to be a thing where people are going to be using Torrent to get into places maybe not in the way that was intended. I think that's about all I've got in me for this round, but just to put it simply, if it's something that you were able to do in Dark Souls 3, you can probably still do it, and if it seems like it would be easier with the ability to double jump on a mount, it probably is. Now, there are a few other things that I've found that could end up being exploits. I just haven't found ways to make them useful yet. There's some weird glitches that happen sometimes when you're mounting or dismounting Torrent, a few other things like that. I just haven't really found a way that they'd be useful yet, so maybe more on that later. Next one is going to be a pretty big one on game systems, so that's going to include stuff you're familiar with, normal combat spells, but also new things like mounted combat and the Ashes of War system. So stay posted, I'll be coming up as soon as I can manage it. Thanks for watching Deconstructing the Game.